Welcome to Grappling with Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making. Help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Olson, and I would like to welcome my special guest for today, Daniella Mestyanek, did I get that right? Young?
Mestyanek.
Mestyanek, thank you. Daniella Mestyanek Young. She is a U.S. Army combat veteran, Harvard scholar, TEDx speaker, and best-selling author. Her new book, The Culting of America, examines how cult tactics have quietly infiltrated American life, especially politics, and why they are so effective at keeping followers in line even when leaders disregard their own principles and values. Here is our topic for today. After the September 10th assassination of Charlie Kirk, reports filled the headlines of tweets and posts celebrating his murder. One teacher in Pennsylvania allegedly shared a post on social media calling Kirk a racist, xenophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, sexist white nationalist mouthpiece. Days later, a Brazilian comedian wrote that Kirk had died too late and said that he was the reason for a Nazi demonstration where they marched in tribute to him. Good riddance. These and similar comments were widely condemned, especially among conservative Republicans. 3 months later, President Donald Trump responded to the murder of Rob Reiner, calling him deranged, very bad for our country, and suggesting that his death was reportedly due to the anger he caused others by his raging obsession with Trump. Far more Democrats than Republicans took exception to his words. Is this an example of cult mentality in American politics? Donald Trump was not the first to employ extremist rhetoric, but he has certainly accelerated its normalization. If we can't agree on the need for civil discourse, how can we possibly work together to maintain a functioning society? How does cult mentality encourage and justify this kind of behavior, as well as the double standards that make it acceptable in the minds of each side as they condemn it from the other? And what can we do about it? And
Yeah.
would you like to start?
I'm going to start with the binary nature of our politics. That, even the founding fathers, as imperfect as they are, warned against having only two political parties. And I think that, so cults are very binary. They're very, very, you're either in or you're out. You're either black or you're white. You're either with us or against us. And unfortunately, in the last 20 years that I've been in America since leaving a cult, I feel like I have watched our politics do that. You can almost think about John McCain and Joe Biden, who were friends and used to sit together, and it has just, the Republicans and the Democrats have just gone marching further and further apart. And we have seen grievance narratives used on both sides, which is exactly what cults do, right? They find you, they play up your discontent, and then they offer you that they are the only solution. And we've seen a lot of that in our politics. And I just think the us versus them nature of it has been bubbling up more and more as people get more and more desperate in the political situation.
Well, the us versus them mentality and then binary thinking are two of the major themes we come back to again and again in our talks about ethics on this program. Um, I read this was probably at least a decade ago in National Review. I think it was Jim Garrity who suggested that politics has become today's religion, and you can't attack people's religion, uh, especially when it's based in dogma. Because then you're a heretic, and heretics must die. So there's no room for compromise because there's only one way of looking at a political ideology, which again has become the divinity in the lives of many people.
Yes, and I think that, this country was started definitely by a religious group, the Puritans. And I think even as far back as 1845 with Manifest Destiny, they were secularizing the like religious mission of go forth and conquer, you know? So that this like secular, it's called the civil religion. Robert Bellah called it the civil religion in America, that we like, we believe so much in our own uniqueness and our own sort of predestination as God's people, you know, even as far as I talk about a little bit in this book, where the Puritans made up this narrative that they were the new Israel, like they were the new Jerusalem, they were the continuation of this old ancient thing that is God's people, so that they could be unquestionably right. And I'm not surprised that you talk about binary thinking a lot on an ethics channel, because you know, one of the things I tell people, my favorite vaccine for keeping yourself from cult thinking is this little mantra: there are many valid ways to live a life.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because
and
cults ultimately are always promising that they have the right way, right? They have the right way and they're going to show you it. And then after a lot of work and some space travel, they're going to promise you transformation.
yeah, it's something I've been thinking about for a very long time. I was not raised religious. I grew up in a very secular home, traveling around the world, ended up in Israel in a seminary, a long series of unlikely events. And one of the conversations we would have in our yeshiva, in our seminary, was, is this a cult? And in fact, when I looked down your list of cult behaviors, I saw a lot of them that really are present in my community. Staying up late and having tremendous admiration for leaders and chanting the same words in form of prayers and song. And we asked ourselves, are we a cult? Are we being brainwashed? So one of my rabbis quipped, we don't wash brains here, we dry clean them. Um, but but the real
Yeah.
answer, which is also consistent with much of the content in your book, is that we were encouraged to ask questions. We were encouraged to challenge. If we didn't
And
understand, if it didn't seem to make sense to us, ask the question and don't be satisfied. Don't stop asking until you're satisfied with the answers.
and this I think is one of the number one things that will make you not a cult, right? Because cults absolutely do not like questions. This is one of the reasons that all of the cults we know of control children a tremendous amount, right? Because children tend to ask questions, right? And not where adults can reason themselves past logic, right? We always say
I like that.
adults miss the red flags, but I don't think they miss them. I've so many narratives of clocking the red flag but then talking yourself past it. But children really can't do that, you know? Or I mean, students, this is why we get protests, I think, from students so often. You know, this is why parents who raise their kids in controlling environments get so upset when their kids go off to college and learn how to question, right? How to question, how to think. And
We
and
hope.
some kids, my husband is one of them, like never really learned that before college, you know, and just this asking of why. And I don't know if you've ever come across this like sort of philosophical exercise of the five whys of, you know, when you have a deep question and it's why, you know, and then you get an answer from whatever leader, why? And, you know, like
Yes.
really going into it 5 times. And I think like vigorously asking why is a super important thing. And groups that are about thought control absolutely cannot allow that. And usually that's because they cannot stand up to the scrutiny and the why. I even have a section in the book about how cults love comics
Uh,
because, you know, it's pictures worth 1,000 words. And when we can't really explain our reasoning, like we can give it to you with a picture.
yeah, and you mentioned critical thinking, which I think has been on the endangered species list for a very long time. Um, Because I mean, so much of education, and the truth is, when you start with very young children, I've taught high school, I've taught adult education, um, and I often got complaints, and still teach part time, and I still get complaints from parents that feel that I'm too hard and I'm expecting too much from my students. When kids are little, their brains are not designed for critical thinking. They're sponges, and that's the time to fill them up with information. But if we don't transition them to increasingly rigorous thinking skills, then they conflate knowledge with wisdom. And they may have lots of information, but they're not able to do anything meaningful with it. And Alexander Pope wrote, "A little learning is a dangerous thing." You give people facts, and you don't teach them how to utilize and how to manipulate and how to process those facts. Then they end up doing more harm than good.
Yes, yes. And, it's interesting to study even like the history of education in this country, because once again, the Puritans invented the modern concept of universal education, right? But it wasn't every kid deserves to go to school so that they are developed, so that they are more successful citizens. It was, we want to indoctrinate the children.
Mm.
And I still think there's so many elements of that. I mean, the way, how shocked I was on my second day of high school when all the children stood up and put their hands like this and started to chant. And I had no context for that other than like seeing documentaries of the USSR. And in Texas, we do the Texas pledge after the American flag. So we get like a double dose of it. And it's so interesting to me. And even now, I have a child in public school, and we've told her, you don't have to do this pledge, but she doesn't want to be different. So the like group norms is another thing that is very, very strong and very, very powerful with people. But this, American education, I think, is this sort of balance between indoctrinating good workers and teaching kids to think. And lately the balance has been not tipping toward the thinking side.
Yeah, and that's I think a really important point. I mean, and you write in your book. I've got it right here. Um, Say an overlooked lesson from cults is that they actually get some things right. They offer mission, purpose, motivation, and community. The stuff that CEOs, community organizers, and leaders of all kinds crave. So, I mean, we certainly want to instill our children with a sense of civic responsibility, with a sense of national pride, with a sense of identity and purpose and values that are associated with what this country is founded on. But it's very easy to stray over a line to become cultish behavior, where
Yes.
I'm reciting words because I'm reciting words without giving any thought to what those words mean or represent or why I'm saying them.
And I also think I spend a lot of time thinking about this term line in the sand, right? Or where is the line? And I think the audience should understand that I was born and raised in the Children of God. The Children of God is the cult that advocated pedophilia, right? So I have been asked for 20 years, how is there this line, right? And then over here on the military side of my brain, I was an intelligence officer that spent 18 months on, staring at the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And if our helicopters crossed the line into Pakistan, bad day, right? The best thing that is happening is you're on the phone with the president. Other things that could happen is like once they closed the gate on us for 2 months and we just didn't get fresh food, right? So like it's bad, right? You are not supposed to cross this line. And it got to the point that every time my analyst would be like frustrated again that the pilots crossed the line, I would be like, okay, you need to go out on a mission because you're staring at a map
Right.
that has a very clear line. And it seems from a distance, it seems so easy to be like, here's the line, we're not going to cross it. But in reality, when you get there, there's no line in the sand, right? Lines in the sand rarely last very long. And when you're surrounded by people who look just like you and think just like you and are telling you that your mission is right, it's really, really easy to cross that line in the sand. And that is sort of my whole analogy for extremism. Like it's not horrifying, it's comforting. And extremist groups open up and embrace you. And all of that, they do something right, right? Like most cult joiners will tell you they felt loved, they felt accepted, they felt, for women in cults in the beginning, you have the type of camaraderie and sharing of the labor that you just don't have in individualistic, atomized American society, especially white America. And I watch this happen to women over and over again, that they're so thrilled to have some help with the labor that they don't realize they're doing 15 times as much labor. They don't realize how exploitative it's becoming.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And, maybe we'll get into some of the other points that what typifies are called and the tactics that they use, what you just described there. We all want to belong. I mean, it's one of these, when they added it to, DEIB and whatever other letters they've added lately, belonging, it's something we all want. We want community, we want connection. And it can be so fulfilling to get that we then first overlook and later deny the elements that are offsetting that.
And, this is something that I see both in my cult survivors and in my veterans, and especially the male veterans that feel such a strong sense of camaraderie when they're in the military. I argue that the women are isolated and not treated the same, but still having that sense of like, you belong here and you're ours now and we're taking care of you, like that can be very comforting. And it's one of the things when people leave cults or the military. First of all, many people go back into the military because they just can't replace those feelings. Yeah. And cult members will tend to go cult hopping. And I believe it is looking for that thing. And one of the things I explain to people is that, everything in cults is not bad, but it's just ramped up to 1,000. So like community's great, but you're not supposed to have 200 people that you barely know in your business all the time or be forced to confess in front of them, right? And like motivation is great, but you're not supposed to be killing yourself for the mission. And it's one of those things that I think my community really struggles with because, as you mentioned, like all humans want motivation and purpose and community and direction and meaning. And we don't realize that our meters for that are just so high, that one of the ways I explain it to people is like when you leave an abusive relationship and there's a part of understanding that, yeah, you might never reach those levels of passion again because that passion wasn't healthy for you. And this is also my answer about good cults. It's like when people say, can you have a good cult? I say, translation, can you coerce and manipulate people in order to get an unhealthy amount of motivation and labor from them? I don't think so. I think you can absolutely have tremendously strong groups and tremendously strong like volunteer organizations. But as soon as you start using these coercive and manipulative tactics, the group always ends up being put in front of the individual.
Yeah, and I mean, it all resonates because I struggled with this a lot when I became religious. I had finished college, I traveled around the world, I ended up in a religious seminary in Israel. And I really had no intention of becoming religious. I just wanted a place to, I just wanted a bed and, a couple of meals a day for a few months until I was on my way to Africa. And I didn't expect to find anything there that would be compelling. But the rabbi who taught me was a former professor of philosophy from Johns Hopkins University. And he was able to lay out these empirical proofs and these logical proofs and this rational case. And and I had a couple of friends who got there at the same time, and we just fought him on everything until we just ran out of arguments because he had answers for all the questions. And the last obstacle I faced was that I didn't trust myself. Am I doing this because I really believe it's true? Or am I doing it just because I like the idea of being part of something greater than myself? And it took
Yeah.
me some time to struggling with that because how do I know?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm fooling myself. Maybe I'm kidding myself.
And this is something that I see in my community in reverse. And actually, one of the things we've done along with this book is we've written a workbook for people to like deprogram themselves. And there's a whole chapter on exit costs, and people will think of you lose money, you lose your community, you lose this, but they don't think of like you lose certainty. When you leave religion, you lose
Yeah.
certainty. When you leave the army, you lose meaning. Or like when Kandahar fell, followed by Kabul in that 2 week period.
Yeah.
My husband and I, we didn't get out of our pajamas for 2 weeks, and I think we had full existential crises
Yeah.
because, like, we believed we were doing a good thing and that we were over there fighting for America and fighting this war on terror. And as it all fell apart so spectacularly, right? It's like you lose the pride that you had in the hard thing that you did. And I think that has been something that's been really, really hard for a lot of people. Just that certainty. And I have to tell my audience a lot, that like certainty is actually very rare. And like having, someone guarantee you that this is the one way to live life. Like everyone wants that, but it's not
Sure.
very good for us.
I mean, Marx called religion the opiate of the people. And, there's a lot to that. We need a sense of purpose. We need to be connected to something higher than ourselves. And if it's not real, we'll manufacture it. And if we don't
Yeah,
have
and
it, we'll,
what's even so interesting is that Max Weber, who defined charismatic authority, said, so he secularized religion, right? Like this concept of like the divine blessing on this person, right? Like this person is extraordinary because God hath chosen them. And he explained, in his opinion, this was in 1913, that because science and technology and modernity had advanced so much that we've essentially lost magic, like our sort of belief in magic or the universe, or for many people, religion, like we needed something else. And so charismatic leaders of all forms can step in to fill that void. And I think that's even why so many religions end up being used by cults, not the other way around, right? Cults will use religions to
Mhm.
control people because most religions have this point to which they cannot explain, cannot give you an answer, so you must believe. And
Yeah.
manipulative people can use that against people
Yeah.
just
People
because
are
like
easily
as
manipulated.
humans we crave certainty, we crave clarity,
Yeah.
and that is also why cults pop up in times of social turmoil.
Mhm. You just said something that I wanted to investigate a little bit because you wrote in your book that with the information age, there's been a quantum leap forward in the desire people have for charismatic leaders. You familiar with Susan Cain? Um,
Yes.
In her TED Talk, which I think everybody should watch, she suggests that when people lived in smaller communities and you knew the same people your entire life, so extroversion and charisma were not commodities because once you really got to know people, it didn't matter how gregarious or how you know compelling they were in their style of interaction. You were interested in character. Except
Right.
with the Industrial Revolution, when people moved to cities, and now all of a sudden they have to interact with a lot of people and they don't have the time to really get to know people. So they would default to charisma and extroversion as the measure of competence, even though there's zero correlation between the two. Um, but then you're suggesting that there's another quantum leap beyond that that happened with the information age.
Oh yeah, and I think that again, and then again, right? So then after World War II, basically, right? Like as a world, we had sort of agreed to walk away from charismatic leaders, to count on treaties and modernity and contracts and law and bureaucracy. And in my book, I'm like, so what happened? And I think what happened is we lived through another apocalypse, which was the information age, crashing straight into the industrial age, right? And everything was affected. And out of this apocalypse comes the tech bro, right? And this has had an outsized influence on our culture as well, with very much the charismatic leader thing coming in. But absolutely is where you talked about charisma as currency. That is something like I know how to charisma people. I know how to be charismatic, and it's a skill that you're not supposedly able to develop, but I think cult babies have it, and cult leaders obviously developed it at some point. But with cult leaders with charisma, like there's a very much an understanding that if you let people get to know you, the charisma, like you must keep yourself somewhat apart so that they don't see that you're a human, right? Like they don't see that, get to that character part, right? That you're just like everyone else. And this is one of the things I found so funny in the military, because there's this culture of like officers will not, hang out with enlisted, and like and I'm just a bubbly, goofy person. And I was the intelligence officer and I was good at that, but I was kind of seen as like, if the soldiers see you trip and fall on a flat floor, they're not going to take you seriously. And it's funny because it's actually one of the things that I work on as a creator is like humanizing myself and letting the audience see the little foibles and the humanity to guard against this kind of like automatic deification that can happen in our world.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too, because if you go back to FDR, he would never let himself be photographed or filmed in a wheelchair. In fact, in
Yep.
the memorial in Washington, D.C., there were complaints when they built it by the disabled community that there wasn't a depiction of him in his wheelchair. And the response was because he never let himself be seen that way. What they did is they did put the casters on the chair, and you have to walk around to the side of the statue and look behind the desk to actually see them there.
Actually see it. Yeah.
Which is, but today we talk about vulnerability as the quality of leadership. Do we really mean that? Or is that just lip service?
I don't think we really mean it at all. No. And even just when I tell you, so I did my master's degree in 2020, right? So not that long ago. And when I tell you the debates that the class would descend into when we talked about, is it okay to bring emotions to work? It's not an option. Your emotions come with you anyway, right? But like, I was shocked by how many of the no's there were, because I was like, haven't we learned that, vulnerability is powerful, and that like servant leadership or transformative leadership, which is the newest thing right now, which is when both the leader and the follower feel like they have changed for the better because of that relationship. Women are slightly better at it, according to recent studies. And like, I just kind of thought we were all on board with that. And it still sometimes shocks me how we still very much have this hard man image of leadership in the background of American culture.
Yeah, and it strikes me constantly that the servant leadership seems to be sort of a new age idea. It comes from King Solomon. God came to him in a
Interesting.
dream. This is 3,000 years ago, and says, whatever you want, I'll give you. He says, give your servant an understanding heart to lead your people. Right? It's not a new idea. And we
Yeah.
used to call our leaders public servants. I don't even know if we still use that terminology. But really, that title should be earned. And maybe that's why it's not popular anymore, because we don't see our leaders as our servants.
Yeah, and this to me is one of the problems of leadership, and I kind of stumbled into being an army officer, right? That happened almost accidentally on purpose, and I was a 15-year-old that came here with $0. So I did not understand anything about like class and stuff, and to me, it was just like we say things like the leader eats last, right? Like you're supposed to be this human that is guiding and guarding people. But in the end, that really wasn't it. But I always knew the difference between like which of my leadership was wearing the rank so that we would honor them, and which of the leadership was wearing the rank so that they could come stand in the gap between you and your higher bosses, and that was like, so then when I finally got around to studying leadership, I was just like, I think it's the wrong people, none of the people who want to be president should we have as the presidents, like, because so, I was always like, I'm wearing this rank in the middle of my chest so that in an emergency, when there are bodies on the ground, you know who to speak to. Like, that's it. That's what it's for. It is a shortcut. It is not like you are not the leader so that people honor you. But very much, I think our leadership is not like that in this country anymore. I don't know that we actually have the concept of servant leadership, although we really do like to talk about it.
What's his name? Do I have the book here? No. The book's called Turn the Ship Around. And it's written by a former captain. He may have become an admiral. I don't remember. I think he did. But when he took over he took over it was a boat or a submarine ship. I don't remember. It had just about the lowest ranking of efficiency of any ship in its class. And he took it over, and in a short time, it became the model. He now gives seminars about his technique. And the kernel of the idea was that you need to have a hierarchy in the military. But at the same time, you can't let that hierarchy deprive soldiers of their initiative and their creativity and their sense of responsibility. So
Yeah.
when a soldier would see something that needed, or an officer would see something that needed to be done, instead of going to the captain and asking permission, he would have them come and say, "Sir, I intend to," and then state what it
To
was that
do
they thought would
this.
be done, and then the captain would generally sign off on that because it was usually a good idea.
Yeah.
And it became a very empowering way of giving these men the feeling that I'm actually making decisions and I'm
Yeah.
responsible. And yes,
You
I have
know,
to go to
I
a cave, but
so there's research from corporations that show that like employees do not get upset if the thing they wanted is not what was chosen. They get upset if they don't feel listened to.
right.
Like that's it. And that was so interesting. In the Army, I was an intelligence officer, which is one of the operations planners. And at any point, the commander's like, okay, we're going to go do this mission. Then our job was to go split into groups and come up with 1, 2, 3 different options. Usually, could be 17, but usually it was 3. And we present them, right? Everyone works on their plan to make it the best, and then the leader picks one, and then we all just fall behind that one and go with it, you know? And so that was really interesting to me. And then I will also tell you, I kind of stumbled onto that same leadership trick, but totally by accident. Like I was put into a job 2 years ahead of schedule that I wasn't exactly prepared for, but hey, that's war. And so I was the senior intelligence officer. And I have this thing about me, probably because I grew up in a cult commune in Brazil. I can't read maps. I mean, I can, but I'm terrible with maps, with geography. I never know where I am in space and time. And it freaked me out. And then I got a lieutenant who worked for me who had a degree in geography. And so I was like, from the beginning, I was like, you're in charge of all map products, all of them. And the way I watched him blossom, right? Like the way he responded when he was given, and lieutenants are not treated very well. So like when he was given something of his own to own, and within 2 weeks, I was like, okay, private, you're in charge of weapons. Okay, you're in charge of this. You're in charge of this. And we had a great system. And like people love to be experts. They love to know their own, area and feel like they're contributing to things. And so, yeah, I felt grateful that I learned this like by accident, that like as the leader, you don't have to be everything. And in fact, usually it's better when you're not. Usually it's better when you're the one letting the people that you lead do the thing, and you are covering for them, giving high level leadership, but not, down in everything.
Yeah, yeah, and in Jewish philosophy, we have a concept of angel as an imperfect translation of what they are, but our angels are they're emanations of the divine will that have been given sort of independent, autonomous form, but they don't have free will. They just do whatever they're designed and programmed to do, and we don't see them. We just are told about them. So what's kind of the point? And the point is that for us to understand that God delegates. He didn't design a world where he does everything. He designed a world where we are partners and we are contributors. And that's the whole reason we exist. And
All right, so I have to tell you this one. So in the Children of God, we were, he called it free love, right? So basically he took evangelicals' control of sex and flipped it and called it free love. I call it forced polyamory. And then with that, as with unfortunately many fundamental religions, but also cults, came the prohibition on birth control, right? And it was God doesn't make mistakes. So if God wants you to have a baby, he gives you a baby, right? And here I am growing up. My mother's pregnant at 14 for the first time by a 43-year-old man. I watch her go through 10 pregnancies. She had seven living children in 14 years. And as a 12-year-old, I was like, don't we think God maybe made laws of science so that he doesn't have to be in your bedroom making that decision every single time? I think God has some helpers.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, yeah, and we believe in big families. I mean, I have a neighbor with 15 children, but we also recognize that not everybody has the psychological wherewithal to be
Yeah,
able to handle that.
right.
And when couples get into a situation where they feel like we just can't handle anymore, it's usually done with rabbinic counsel, but that option is there for when it's needed. And that willingness to adapt to situations and recognize that there are not one size fit all solutions for every person, for every family, for every situation. That I can see
And
how that would not be consistent with a cult mentality.
and this is what I think is like such a an interesting thing for or important thing for people to understand right now is that like there are no easy solutions to complicated problems, right? There's 8 billion people in the world. People are allergic to water, right? People are born allergic to parts of their own bodies. Like there's nothing that works for everyone. And this is, in cults coming up. I mean, I'm neurodivergent. Like it didn't work for me. I'm so sound sensitive and I grew up around 150 people, and it was like, but in cults, there's no, like, you cannot stand out, right? Like, you are not supposed to be an individual. This is part of why I think cults hate all medical care, not just birth control. Um, and, incidentally, in the military, at least in the army, like, we have this saying, we're like, all you got to do to be successful is be in the right place at the right time in the right uniform and never volunteer for anything. It's just like, look like everybody else, be quiet, don't stand out, play the game, and this ability, you can be in a very religious community, you can be in a very high demand community, but the ability to be yourself, I think is that very, very important thing. And the negation of individuality, I think, is why we have one of the heaviest side effects of cults, which is a lot of suicide.
And what it sounds to me like you're suggesting is that um, a lot of the success of cults is preying on different fears. The fear of being alone, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of lack of structure, lack of purpose, lack of meaning. And if the cult can claim to eliminate these fears, then that just becomes so attractive that many are willing to pay any price
Yes.
and
Yes. And it's
relinquish their self-control and their sense of identity and all the things that many of us take for granted.
it is clarity, right? And you talked about Susan Cain, whose book is called Quiet, and I'm like the noise, right? The noise in our world, like as it gets crazier, as it gets more confusing, people are pulled into these things, and it is really about they'll find your discontent, they'll blow that up for you, and then promise to sell you the solution, and so many people fall for it, like you said. And on the flip side, when people leave cults, they often are just very afraid, so afraid. In part, that's because the cult told you a whole bunch of bad things were going to happen to you. But in part, it's because, like, cults essentially promise you, they give you a million rules for how to live your life, right? There's a bazillion things you got to do. But if you do all of this, we promise that your life will go this way, right? Like, we promise that you'll end up in a golden city inside the moon in heaven. That was my cult, and the answer is there's no guarantees, and so one of the things I tell people is that are newly out of cults, I just tell them, like, you weren't any more likely to not have bad things happen to you inside the cult than you are now, that and of course bad things happen to people in cults. That's why they use all of these thought stopping cliches to, stop you from thinking about it, and keep focused on this, like, promise of what you're going to get. And, it's something that I noticed about myself in my life, that for 20 years I was looking for a mentor, and eventually I realized, like, I was looking for someone to tell me how to live my life. And I kept getting quite frustrated because I had several very good mentors and they refused to tell me exactly how to live my
Which
life.
is what made them good mentors.
And especially when you're like, I literally looked up an old college professor and I was like, which path should I choose? And he was like, Daniela, I have no doubt that you will be absolutely successful in any of these paths. And I was like, this is not helpful. And ultimately, I had to realize that too after a lifetime of being told exactly what to do. I 100% know that if I hadn't ended up joining the military, I would have gotten a PhD by 25 because there is a system that was going to tell me what to do next.
Uh,
And, you know, I didn't know how to operate in the world, and that's terrifying.
yeah. And of course, that's something that many of us have faced coming out of college. Okay, I've been in education my entire life, and now I'm supposed to actually start being responsible for myself.
Yeah.
Um, my
Um,
solution was to go hitchhiking cross country.
and it's interesting because I'm not like I just don't think I have a spiritual bone in my body. I don't spend time worrying about sort of what comes after. Like I'm just very interested in this life in this world. However, my 10-year-old teenager, very spiritual and very afraid of death. And so it's something we've dealt with a lot. And there was a while where she's like, Mommy, I want to believe in heaven. Is that okay? And I told her, absolutely, right? Like anything, first of all, I was like, almost everybody, religious or not religious, believes that when you love people enough, you'll find them again in another version of something, right? But also I told her, I was like, if it's comforting for you to believe in heaven, girlfriend, let's design our mansions, right? Let's believe in heaven. I just don't want you to compromise anything in this life for what someone promises you is in a next life. So that's how I'm getting that.
Yeah, and the truth is that even if you leave spirituality out of it completely, life is all about making choices and setting priorities. If I want to be healthy, I can't eat everything I want. I have to work out a little bit. I have to live some sort of a responsible lifestyle. If I want to be able to
Yeah.
support myself, I can't just go running around doing everything that feels good. I have to discipline myself
Yeah.
to find a way to support my basic needs. So we do give things up, but it's not really, if we don't frame it that way, if instead we say,
Yeah.
I'm investing in my priorities and my values, and then
But
it's a
it's
whole different type
also,
of
I
thinking.
think, so first of all, the health field is so full of cults, and
Oh,
I
yes.
think that it is, you can't be all or nothing, and so I always say, like, there's a reason they say happy and healthy,
Uh-huh.
right? Because if you're too happy, you're not going to be healthy. And if you're too healthy, you're not going to be happy. There was, I think like a decade ago, I remember there was this story of this like, vegan marathoner dude who lived till 93. And they asked him if he could go back and change it. And he was like, I would have just eaten the damn burgers, because like it's so hard. But I mean, this was, you know, even for my family, like with my husband was in the unit that just flew to Venezuela. He was in the special
Wow,
operations aviation.
my goodness.
So this was a hard, dangerous job.
Yeah.
And I'm an expert on how pilots don't come home. So it was like really scary. And, we had this motto, live today like he deploys tomorrow. It's just like to remind us that like we can't be all or nothing. Like we need to enjoy the moments that we can to balance out these like sad and scary moments.
Say that again. I'm sorry. Live today
Live today like he deploys tomorrow.
like he deploys tomorrow.
So
Right.
kind of this like don't be saving up all of your good times for the
Uh-huh.
future.
Right.
Have a balance right now and like do the things now. And I also think like this, one of the things I say to people that how you can protect yourself from exploitation is don't ever devote all of yourself to any other, person, place, thing, or idea. because that's how you will become manipulated, and this sort of what we have been talking about this whole time, right? This ability to step into, at least see the other side, or at least, hold space for yourself, no matter how much good you think this thing is doing for you or the world. Because that's what, controlling groups do not allow. And that breaks the group's hold. Like if it is a controlling group, kind of funny, but my husband right now is maybe getting a little bit of pressure because he's a full-time graduate student, but he doesn't have to work because he's funded by the government. So I think they just kind of feel like he's not suffering enough. It's not like best student, everyone wants him to do a PhD, but there's this back and forth answer of like, but graduate school's hard, but you're supposed to be, this like very working 180, 120 hours a week, whatever it is. So yeah, this interesting, even in things that are not cults, often will take and take and take from you.
Yeah.
And I just think in general, we live in a world of groups and systems are stronger than individuals, which is why even in most wonderful organizations, we still have examples of them hurting people.
Yeah.
And so having this balance,
Yeah.
is what's important.
Sure. And that goes back to the rejecting binary thinking and rejecting the us versus them and all of these ways of thinking that tilt us out of balance. We need to be constantly course correcting.
Yeah.
Uh,
And even, I have like one of my 10 commandments for good groups that are not cults is I say, hold nothing sacred, right? Which I don't actually mean hold nothing sacred, don't
I got
believe
that
fully
sense.
in anything, but just understand that that's where you're open to manipulation. So for me, it's hitting children. Absolutely not okay, right? And I hold that so sacred. Or child trafficking would be another one, very near and dear to my heart. But that would be, I know that I could be open to manipulation if somebody showed up and said they were doing legislation to make spanking illegal, right? Or like, as we even saw with the cabals of pedophiles and the way like people were pulled into that,
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean, and
Yeah. I
I
really like
sometimes use
that.
this analogy too of like, so I was the intelligence officer. So my job is to just know everything about the bad guys
Mhm.
and so that we can try to bring everyone home, right? And so operations and intelligence are on purpose set at odds with each other because operations job is go take that. Intelligence's job is bring everyone home. Well, the best way to bring everyone home is not to go near the village, but that's a
Right.
really ineffective way to take the village,
Right.
right? So it becomes this tug of war. And I think every corporation needs that, needs like a culture person to fight their ops person. And I think like we all need to sort of be doing that in our life, which again comes back to the balance thing, right? And it's how balanced can you keep yourself in this world that's trying to pull you to one side or the other? Can you walk in the middle? Can you
Yeah. One of the things I say
hold
from my notes from
values?
yeah, one of the things in my notes from your book is to know your enemy. And it reminded me when I was in college as a freshman, and I was at the University of California, Davis, which is about 70 miles from San Francisco. I was going to meet my parents in San Francisco, so I needed to buy a bus ticket. So I had a free period. I had time to walk to the bus station. It happened to be just as I walked out the door, it started hailing, and I'm all bundled up, and it's hailing on me, and there's nobody out. And then it turns from hail into pouring rain, and I'm trudging through the rain. And a guy on a bicycle rides by. He's got a full weather suit on. He's on a bicycle. He drives by. And as he drives by, he looks over his shoulder at me and says, "Hey there." I says, "Hi." And he circled around and he came back alongside me and started keeping pace with me and just chatting. And I thought, nobody just strikes up a conversation with a stranger in the middle of a pouring rainstorm. And we're chatting, and as we're walking along, and I notice at some point he starts going a little slow. He gets off his bike, and his mind's going a little slower and slower until we've stopped. And he says to me, "Have you ever heard of Scientology?"
I was trying to guess who it was going to be.
And fortunately, I had actually just been doing some research on on cults. I was fascinated with them in college, and I said, "Yeah, I heard of it." He said, "Well, my office is right here. Would you like to come in?" I said, "You know what? I can't. I don't have time right now. Maybe another time." But this type of thing happened to me repeatedly, and I realized that a lot of people in college are lonely. They're not in the right groups. They don't have the right friends. They're not sure who they are. They're trying to find themselves, and they're vulnerable. And somebody walking alone, especially in the rain, come up,
Yes.
chat him up, be friendly, tell him about how you've got a way that's going to make him happy. You can see it happening
This
really
is
easily.
my cult origin story is in like 1971 or 2 is sitting in a park. He's just had a bad LSD trip the night before where he met Satan. And so the next day, he's sitting in a park with his head in his hands, as one does after they meet Satan, I assume. And up walk the happy, smiley, guitar playing children of God, right? And off he goes.
Yeah.
And I always have to stop that story and then be like, but they weren't walking through the park looking for a group of 4 happy people chatting and hanging out. They were walking through the park looking for the young man with his head in his hands. And one of the things I tell people, and one of the reasons I wrote this book is not intended to be your group's occult. This book is intended to help you diagnose the tactics. Because what I have learned is anywhere in the space of personal transformation, predators are going to show up. The same way that anywhere that cares for children, predators are going to show up.
Yeah.
And so that is college. That is exercise, diet, religion, education, but it's also losing a loved one. So we're all going to be in spaces of transformation or transition again in our lives. And also we're all going to be operating in groups and systems. And so like understanding how best you can navigate that. Which is interesting because even as much as I talk about like there are no absolutes in black and white, people always want me to give them like a very happy answer to like this is how you avoid cults. And unfortunately, I think there's one type of person who is immune to cults. And I think it is those people who are 100% satisfied with their lives. And it is probably a bit of what folks might call a small life. And they're just like the Samwise Ganges, I don't think can be drawn into a cult. However, I always say, it's my job to remind people that it's always low threat. It's never no threat. And so, for example, maybe your group only has one of these things, a distinguishable vernacular, right? And I get this a lot from engineers or from doctors where they're like, oh, what? So now it's a cult? And I'm like, well, no, but now you're more isolated, right? Like now the distinguishable vernacular is still doing what it does, which is isolate you, make you feel special, give you shortcuts, and bring in all these other things. And so, yeah, you're just more at risk in a field with a personalized language of falling prey to the toxic situation. So, I say with my 10-part diagnosis, like you got to have all 10 to be a
Yeah.
cult. Because they all go hand in hand and like lead to this thing. However, if you have 5, you might want to look at those, like you might want to look at those places
Hmm.
to see where these things are coming in. And it's not bad. necessarily. Like, I'm very charismatic and I'm able to make any argument that I want and make it sound good. And so I have a very strict rule with my content that 25% or more comes from not me, comes from other books that I read, other people that I bring in, and all of that stuff, because I want to avoid that. And so this is, my final thing is like, I'm not here to be negative. I'm not here to diagnose everything as a cult, but merely to kind of like offer these tools to how you can think about this as we are living through times of social turmoil. And we know that predators are going to be here to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good place to wrap up. The sages have a teaching: don't trust yourself until the day you die. And they say it about a
I
great
like
leader.
that.
He was the high priest. He was the king. He was a righteous person. He did great things, and then at the end of his life, he became a heretic. It doesn't matter how virtuous, how pious, how righteous, how wise we are. We're always vulnerable in some way, at some time, and just the awareness of that vulnerability will help us protect ourselves
Yep.
against the
And
dangers that are out there.
and that is basically the whole concept of what intelligence is built on. It's like, we know that the scenario we give you is not going to be the exact scenario that you encounter, but just the fact that you have had to prepare yourself for something. We even call it war gaming, because it's like, well, what if you have to do this? Well, you're going to be more prepared for whatever hits you if you've already, are walking in that kind of like circumspect, careful way, and you've done the things you need to do to protect yourself. So,
Yeah, well, Danielle Young, thank you. It's really a pleasure, and really admire. You've come a long way. You've used your challenges to articulate ways for people to protect themselves from the types of things you had to go through, and perhaps you've given us a little bit of guidance on how we can navigate our way out of the cultish behavior that's already somewhat entrenched in our society. How can people find you and connect with you?
yeah, Rabbi Goldson, I appreciate this conversation so much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting me. I can be found at almost any social media at Knitting Cult Lady is my channel, and my website is knittingcultlady.com. My books, Uncultured and The Culting of America, can be found pretty much anywhere. And yeah, come find me on social media, because we just like knit and talk about bad guys and tyrants, and it's a wild time to be an expert on the bad guy.
It is way too many examples. Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure, and you should have continued success in spreading the word and helping people protect themselves from the dangers that are out there.
Yes,
For those of
sir.
you who are watching and listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we will take it up. And not in this particular episode, but in many episodes, we do have a backstage conversation that continues. If you'd like access to those, go to my Substack, look into becoming a premium member. Until then, as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray. Okay, we are no longer streaming.
Such a good name, Grappling with the Gray.
Well, you want to
Yeah,
go in for that black and white.
yeah, that's what we got to keep doing. All right,
Well, thanks for your
go feed
time.
my family. Thank
Enjoy
you
the
so much.
conversation. All the best.
Bye.